In this video we'll show you how to rebuild your motorcycle brake caliper. Step 1. Equipment. So you'll need the correct tools and sockets for your bike. You want a piston extractor. Ideally the sliding one is much better. If you've not got that, the second best one are internal piston extracting pliers. You'll need a vacuum bleeder. You can do it without, you can do it manually, but it just takes a long time. It's really time consuming. Vacuum bleeder just does it much better. You'll need some brake fluid, obviously. You'll need some rubber grease, copper grease, and if it's a sliding caliper, you'll need some lithium grease. At the bare minimum, you want some seals. Don't reuse the old seals, that'd just be stupid. But ideally, you want a full caliper rebuild kit. Step 2. The bike. You want to get the bike on a stand so the wheel's elevated and free to rotate. Step 3. Removal. So before you delve straight in and remove the caliper, it's easier to loosen the brake pins first. Now you can undo the caliper from the mounting bolts. Once that's done, you can just slide the caliper off. Once you've done that, you want to remove the brake pads. Now at this point I recommend pumping the pistons out as much as you can. It makes them easy to remove in the future. Careful not to pump them out too far, so putting a bar in is ideal for this job. Next you want to remove the brake line. I recommend getting a dirty jug to hand for all the old brake fluid because you don't want to get it everywhere. And if you can't undo it by holding it, you can just temporarily put the caliper back on to brake this. Step 4. Strip. Now we're going to strip the caliper down. What you want to do is remove the pistons. Now if you're reusing these pistons, you want to be very careful, and something like a piston extracting tool like this will be best for the job. I'm going to use some new pistons, so it doesn't matter if I use something like this, internal piston pliers, just to get the job done and get them off. Never mind, they're quite nasty. They're seized in place, so plan B. Next, we want to remove the bleed nipple, these two rubber boots, and the seals, and this pad return spring as well. There we go. Step 5. Clean. Once everything's removed, all the rubber parts and everything's removed, one of the biggest issues from binding is corrosion getting round the back of the seal along here. So you want to get plenty of brake cleaner, ideally a toothbrush, and clean it as much as possible. And if a toothbrush doesn't get this corrosion up, you want to use a wire brush, but a brass one, because this is only aluminium. You don't want to do damage to it, so a brass one will be plenty. Once you've got them looking clean, what you want to do is get any dirt, anything out. Use plenty of brake cleaner, loads of clean block, blue roll. Get it squeaky clean. Inside the seats for the seals, you want to make sure there's no corrosion. There's nothing there at all. You want to make sure inside the pistons it's squeaky clean. Use plenty of brake cleaner and plenty of blue roll. You also want to make sure the bleed nipple surface is clean and not damaged. And especially check that this surface doesn't have any nicks or anything in. This is where the banjo bolt seats onto with the crush washer. Also, if it's a sliding caliper like this one, you want to check inside there there's no build-up of grease and dirt. You want to make sure everywhere it's nice and clean and free of any residue as well. That's why you use brake cleaner. It doesn't leave any residue behind. And then dry it out. Using the air line is perfect for that. And ready to start assembling it. Step 6. Rebuild. Get yourself a fresh pair of gloves on. And just double check that everything's squeaky clean. This is an old caliper, so it's not going to come out like new, but providing all the seating surfaces and everything are nice and clean, we're good. Now you'll get, on the vast majority of calipers, except for some racing calipers, you get two sets of seals. Your fluid seal and your dust seal. A lot of kits also come with new rubbers for sliding calipers, new bleed nipple and cover for it, new crush washers. Use new ones every time you take the banjo bolt off. And this comes with some new stainless pistons. If you're not using them, and just check the old ones, check there's no pitting or anything on them, otherwise they'll damage the new seals. And some rubber grease. Once you've got an even coating all round, just install the seal like so. Do the same with the dust seal, especially on the dust seal, because these are the ones that seem to get a lot of corrosion. And repeat the process on each piston. Make sure they're well seated, and there's nothing sticking out. And if there's any bit of excess, just wipe the excess off. Then put a bit of brake cleaner in the lid. Just put a bit on the piston to help lubricate it when you put it in place. And you don't want to force anything, it should just nicely seat in place. Like so. Next with a bleed nipple. Especially because this is a stainless steel bleed nipple, you want to get just a small amount of copper grease on the thread. Keep it away from this. Just make sure it nips up nicely. You don't need to put much on it at all. Same with the boots, if you've got a sliding caliper. Just get a little bit of rubber grease. Where the boots mount onto. Put them in place. That one's fairly straightforward. These can be a pain in the ass. There we go. Now for the slider and the pads. You want to make sure the slider's nice and straight and there's no damage or corrosion on the pins or the sliders. You also want to check that they're not bent as well. And apply some lithium grease. And wipe off any excess. Next is to fit the pads, but first don't forget to put that back in. Now when fitting pads, some people swear by using copper grease on the back of them, some people say not to do it. Personally, I apply a little bit where the piston meets just a very small smear. Obviously some people say that it contaminates the brakes, but if you're going to apply a small amount like that, it's never going to contaminate any brakes. And you'd be stupid to not put them on the pins, because they're seized in place for fun. Apply a little bit to the threads on the pins. And just recheck over everything. Make sure everything's nice and free. And again, as soon as you fit it, wipe off any excess bit of grease. Step 7. Refit. Get some brake cleaner on the disc. Get some fresh blue roll. To make sure there's no grease or anything on, because you don't want to contaminate your pads. Then fit your brake caliper. When fitting the caliper bolts, bear in mind some bikes like Harley Davidson's recommend you use thread lock. So check your bike's manual to see if you need to do the same. The same goes with this part. Make sure you check your bike's manual for the right torque setting for the caliper mounting bolts. And just make sure them pins are nipped up. You don't want to do them really tight, obviously. Next, you want to make sure you always put new crush washers on either side of the banjo. And then tuck the banjo bolts up. Now you're ready to start putting brake fluid in. You want to start by topping up the brake fluid reservoir, and you want one of these tools, vacuum bleeder, perfect kit. If you've not got one of these, you're doing it manually, opening the valve, pumping the brake, shutting the valve, and it's just really time consuming. So first, top the reservoir up, and while you're bleeding it, you want an assistant to make sure that that fluid stays topped up. So you want to put the vacuum bleeder over the brake nipple. Pump it to build up some pressure. And open the nipple. And while you're doing that, you're keeping the pressure up and making sure someone keeps the fluid level topped up. And once it's drawn a bit through, you want to pump the brake and see if it'll bring the pistons out. I've got a bit of a brake already, which means the pistons are out now. So then build up some more pressure. Crack the bleed nipple again. And blow all the air we can out. How are we foot level on your side, Paul?
Good.
At the right level or too much?
Too much.
Right, tell me when.
April.
And then we want to test the brakes working. When you're bleeding up, you want to check for a few things. You want to check for travel on the lever, that it's not excessive, and you want to check for any leaks as well. So press down the pedal, keep the pressure on, and just test that you've no leaks around things like the banjo bolt, the bleed nipple, or the seals or anything like that.
Step 8. Final checks.
You want to recheck all your torque settings, check the fluid level is spot on, make sure there's no leaks or anything, sit on the bike, apply the brake and test travel, how much travel there is. If there's excessive travel, there's probably air in the system. Turn the wheel, apply the brake, make sure you do all those things to test that it's okay before you road test it. We're going to put this on the rolling road to make sure it's spot on, but road testing it works pretty much the same way. Oh yeah, and go back over it, make sure there's no excess grease, especially on the sliders, because you apply lithium grease on it. Some of the lithium grease pushes out and you get grease around the sliders, so you want to make sure any excess is wiped off and there's nothing that can contaminate pads or the disc.
Step 9. Subscribe, like and hit the bell icon.